Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're tackling something totally fascinating from our source material, the effort gate, and why trying to copy geniuses is actually a massive trap. Look, we all want to learn faster and perform better, right? So naturally, we try to mimic the top performers in our field. It makes sense. But as we're going to discover today, this intuitive strategy is fundamentally flawed. Let's dive straight in.
It's kind of the ultimate paradox, isn't it? Why on earth does studying exactly like a genius actually make you worse? On the surface, asking what the best people do seems incredibly intuitive. Like, if I want to be great, I should just do what great people do. But the source points out this huge, incredibly common trap. You ask a top performer how they study, and they'll say, "Oh, I use flashcards," or "I just read my notes," or maybe they just highlight a textbook. So you go home, you make 1,000 flashcards, you highlight your book until it literally glows in the dark, and you still struggle. You still feel totally overwhelmed. Why? Because you are copying the exact wrong things. We are completely missing the invisible mechanisms that actually make them geniuses in the first place.
There's this analogy here that just brilliantly nails the flaw in our logic. Think about it like this. If you want to be an Olympic sprinter, it makes sense to look at how Olympic sprinters train, right? But if you ask, what is a strategy that 100% of top performers in every single industry do every day, the answer is, well, they breathe. You see, when we look at top performers, we have this bad habit of looking for the things they have in common with each other, and often with us. We look for the common denominator. But if you really want to find out what makes them elite, we shouldn't be looking for what they do commonly, we need to be looking for what they do differently. We absolutely have to find the uncommon denominator.
It's really fascinating how the source draws a hard line here between what we can physically see and what actually matters. When we watch a top performer, we're only seeing their physical habits. We see them typing notes, clicking through a specific app, or flipping through a deck of cards. But their success? It has almost nothing to do with those physical habits. The real magic is entirely in their cognitive habits. It's all about what happens the exact moment new information hits their brain. How are they organizing those thoughts? What hidden internal questions are they asking themselves? How are they instinctively connecting concepts? We have to copy successful people cognitively, not physically. Because honestly, copying their physical habits is exactly like copying the paint job on a Ferrari and expecting it to win a race without the engine.
Let's put some numbers to this to make it super clear. Let's say your learning system has 100 knowledge gaps in it. You go ask a genius what they do, and they casually say, "Oh, I use flashcards." Well, for that genius, their highly advanced cognitive habits are already handling like 90% of the learning process effortlessly in the background. Flashcards are just plugging a tiny little 10% hole at the very, very end of their system. But if you have 100 gaps and you try to fill the whole thing with flashcards, you're only solving 10 of your problems. You still have 90 massive gaping holes in your learning. And frankly, those 10 gaps you just filled probably aren't even the most critical ones anyway.
So that leaves us staring at this huge gap we can call the deep processing divide. We have to figure out what is actually handling that other 90%. What's the uncommon denominator separating the elite achievers from everybody else? It all comes down to a very specific concept: deep processing. People at the very top of their fields innately possess incredibly high processing capabilities. Whether it's through genetics, early childhood exposure to critical thinking, or just their environment, they've formed brain pathways that automatically connect information at a super advanced level. When new data comes in, it just clicks. Their default, everyday way of thinking is already deeply, deeply connected.
And here's the crazy part. They usually have absolutely no idea they're even doing it. There's this awesome anecdote in the source material about a medical student who was at the very top of his class. This guy never took notes during lectures. He would literally just sit there and occasionally chuckle to himself. When someone finally asked him how he actually studied, he just said, "I just like to read the textbooks for fun." Seriously, who reads a medical physiology textbook for fun? But the thing is, because of his innate deep processing, the way his brain naturally wrestled with the material created so much rich, connected engagement that he genuinely found it entertaining. If you or I tried to copy his physical habit, literally just sitting there reading, we would fail miserably because we can't see that massive cognitive machinery running silently in the background.
Okay, so what if we aren't genetically gifted deep processors? How do we build that invisible machinery for ourselves? Well, it is all about connecting the dots. We have to consciously, deliberately force our brains to do what geniuses just do automatically. We have to focus on relational thinking.
This right here is exactly how you cognitively copy a genius.
When you take in two pieces of information, let's just call them A and B, you cannot just passively read them. You have to force a relationship between them. The ultimate level, what we can call the S tier, is looking for influence and impact. You actively ask yourself, okay, if concept A were to change, how exactly would that influence or alter concept B? That requires an incredibly deep, nuanced understanding. Now, if you're learning something totally brand new, you might not know how they influence each other yet. That's totally fine. In that case, you drop down to the A tier, similarities and differences. You force your brain to ask, how is concept A distinctly similar or completely different from concept B? It's a remarkably effective way to build those new brain pathways.
You know when you read a page and you think, yeah, I feel like I get it, but you're really just basing that purely on vibes? I absolutely love this analogy from the source material to explain why that doesn't work. Imagine you're standing in a pitch-black room, and I hold up a playing card and ask you what it is. You might squint and say, I think it's the 5 of spades. You're basically just guessing based on a really vague shape. You're going off vibes, and that is how most of us learn. We rely on this subjective, fuzzy feeling of understanding. But by aggressively comparing similarities and differences, it's literally like turning the lights on in that dark room. Suddenly you have crystal clear, sharp resolution. You have structurally defined the concepts against one another. No more guessing.
Now, you might be wondering, if this relational thinking is the ultimate key, why aren't we all just doing it all the time? Well, because eventually, every single one of us winds up facing the effort gate. Changing the way your brain inherently thinks is exhausting, and it's so tempting to just fall back on those comfortable, easy habits like highlighting and flipping flashcards. The effort gate of achievement is this intensely uncomfortable, deeply energy-draining cognitive barrier. It stands directly between your current, passive habits and that active, elite, deep processing you're trying to build. Let me be clear. When you first start forcing your brain to jump straight to finding influences and impacts between concepts, it is going to feel terrible. It is going to feel frustrating, incredibly slow, and completely unnatural.
And look, there are deep, hardwired biological reasons why this happens. First off, our human brains are naturally geared for energy preservation. They are inherently lazy. Habits literally exist purely to save effort. So, anything that isn't a well-established habit is going to feel tremendously effortful. But even beyond the biology, the source highlights this massive psychological barrier, the severe fear of slowing down. We've been so conditioned to believe that speed equals intelligence. When you abandon your easy, familiar methods and suddenly it takes you twice as long to get through a single chapter because you're mentally wrestling with the concepts, immense anxiety sets in. You start panicking, thinking, oh no, what if I fail? What if I'm not covering enough ground?
But here is the massive cognitive reframe you absolutely must make right now. Slowing down is a sign of elite neurodevelopment, not incompetence. A true deep processor doesn't actually understand things faster at first glance. They process much slower because their personal bar for what constitutes actual understanding is just incredibly high. They aren't just looking at the dictionary definition, they're looking at the nuance, the context, the impact. So when you feel that intense effort, when you feel yourself slowing down to a total crawl just to connect concepts, you aren't doing it wrong. Actually, you are finally doing it right. That anxiety and effort is the exact proof that you are standing squarely at the effort gate of achievement.
If you can just push through that effort gate and sit with that total discomfort until it becomes your new automatic habit, you eventually reach this incredible state of dancing in your knowledge. But while we're in the thick of it, how do we know we're actually heading in the right direction? We need a definitive compass to make sure we're on track. Usually, we measure our success using lagging indicators. Things like, did I pass the test? Or what was my exam score? But think about it. By the time you get an exam score back, it is way too late to change your process. What we really need is a leading indicator. We need something we can measure minute by minute while we're actually doing the work. And surprisingly, the single most accurate leading indicator is simply the physical, subjective feeling of engaged fluidity and genuine curiosity inside your own mind. Look, testing yourself is a great way to measure progress, sure, but formal exams are very low-frequency feedback. What we want to focus on, the tool you can literally use today, is that high-frequency feedback loop, the feeling. Every single minute you sit down to learn something, you can pause and ask yourself, am I just reading linearly and feeling totally bored, or am I actively bouncing back and forth between these concepts, feeling a spark of curiosity and actively resolving my own confusion? Humans are actually surprisingly accurate at identifying that specific feeling of productive cognitive strain. Trust me,
That high-frequency feeling is your absolute best tool for staying on track. When you finally build these cognitive habits and aggressively push past that effort gate, you reach a state that the source just beautifully describes as dancing in the halls of your knowledge. You are no longer just memorizing a bunch of isolated random facts. You have built this connected, three-dimensional space that you completely own. You can fluidly move from any one point of information to any other point, effortlessly connecting variables because you deeply, fundamentally understand their distinct relationships and impacts. It stops being a chore. It genuinely becomes as engaging as analyzing a great movie or a hobby you absolutely love.
So I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought to really challenge your process today. Take a hard look at your current routines. Are you actually doing the invisible, deeply uncomfortable work of building connected knowledge? Or are you just heavily relying on familiar, physical habits to avoid doing the heavy lifting? The effort gate of achievement is standing right in front of you. Yes, it's exhausting, and yeah, it's super intimidating, but it is the true, undeniable path to the elite achievement we're all looking for. The question is, are you ready to step through it?